Yeah, as I said, I'm Elaine McElroy, one of the partners in the employment and immigration team at Brodie's, and with me today is Erin McLafferty, and we're both going to be presenting on the July changes to the immigration rules. So the changes that we're going to talk about today are those that impact employers. So we're going to be focusing on the skilled worker route changes. And these changes were trailed in a white paper, which the government published back in May 2025. And you'll have probably seen talk about that in the press, etc. The detail of the actual changes was only published on the 1st of July, so just 3 weeks before the rules were implemented. And that's when we got the actual flesh on the bones, the detail of what was changing. And it gave employers a really small window of time to learn about the changes, get to grips with them, and also to prepare by possibly sponsoring people under the old rules who might not qualify under the new ones. So we weren't given a lot of opportunity to get to grips with them, but a couple of months in, we now want to give you a more detailed overview of the changes and to highlight what HR need to know about in response to those. And the first thing to say about the changes is that they are significant. We did, of course, have another significant set of changes to the immigration rules in April 2024. And as we go through the session today, we'll touch on those. And those April 24 changes made a big difference to the minimum salary requirements. So they were designed to reduce net migration, but they did through the sort of mechanism of pay, as it were. This set of changes is also designed to reduce net migration significantly, but it does it in a different way by tackling the skills threshold, so bringing that right up to generally highly skilled jobs, but they've both got the same intention. And it's been estimated that these latest changes will reduce the levels of skilled worker sponsorship by around 40%. So that tells you how significant they are. And in summary, they're going to make it more difficult for employers to sponsor people. So let's get onto the agenda and we'll take you through the detail as we go. So the first part of the session today, which I'm going to talk about, are the new eligibility criteria for the skilled worker route, and we'll cover the new skills threshold, which is the most important one, but pay levels were also changed as well. So we'll touch on those. Erin is then going to talk about the immigration salary list and the new temporary shortage list. She will also touch on what the changes mean for adult social care. And then we'll look at some future changes which are coming. Some of those have been talked about in the white paper, and we'll set out some of the detail for those, but we'll maybe come back to those on another webinar. So starting then with the new eligibility criteria for the skilled worker route, if we just go on to the next slide. So from the 22nd of July, the rules changed, of course, in relation to skilled worker sponsorship. And these changes apply to those being assigned a certificate of sponsorship for the first time from the 22nd of July onwards. So we've got different rules that apply to people who were already in the skilled worker route before that cut-off date, or who were already issued a certificate of sponsorship before that date. So it's important to bear in mind that sort of requirement. And so from the 22nd of July onwards, for new sponsorships, new people into the skilled worker route, generally only highly skilled roles are eligible for sponsorship. There are some exceptions to that, which Erin will touch on those other lists. But around 180 jobs came off the list of jobs that are suitable for sponsorship. So that's a really significant drop. And what we mean by highly skilled is broadly sort of graduate level or above. When people talk about medium skilled jobs, which we had before under the previous rules, that refers to kind of A level or above, or Scottish higher level or above jobs. And what these changes do is basically returning us back to the pre-Brexit days. So the skilled worker route end of the Brexit transition period was for highly skilled jobs. They then opened it right up to medium and highly skilled jobs, and made it a much more accessible system for employers to use sponsorship. And now we're going right back to the pre-Brexit days in terms of narrowing sponsorship back to those highly skilled jobs. The minimum general salary threshold was also increased on the 22nd of July to 41,700. And as we go through, I'll show you some tables that set out more of the detail around the sort of pay rates. And the employer must pay the higher of that general salary threshold, 41,700, or the going rate for the particular job code, whichever is the higher. The general threshold, it's important to remember that the person needs to work sufficient hours to hit that number. It cannot be prorated, whereas the going rate for the job can be. And as we look at the salaries as we go through, I'll touch on some other exceptions or salary discounts that do apply to that headline figure. So just because a job is below that doesn't mean it's ineligible for sponsorship, because it's more complicated than that. So we do also have these transitional arrangements that apply, and those apply to people who were already in the skilled worker route and assigned a certificate of sponsorship. So before the 4th of April 2024 changes, those people are in the best position. They're subject to the most flexible rules, and there's special transitional arrangements in place for them in terms of pay and the skills level. But there's now another set of rules that apply to those who were sponsored between the 4th of April 2024 and up to the 21st of July 2025. So we've now effectively got three different sort of groups of people with slightly different criteria applicable to them. So for those who benefit from those transitional arrangements, additional roles are available for sponsorship, including medium skilled roles. And those for those pre-4th of April people, there's also very significant salary concessions apply, which makes it much easier to sponsor them. So if we just move on to the next slide. So a key point to take from all of that, which you've probably got already, is that the rules are now more complex than they were. We've got the three different sets of criteria operating depending on which transitional arrangements apply or whether somebody's subject to the new rules. And the complexity, I would just sort of put out a bit of a sort of warning flag about that. If you're looking at the immigration rules, which are published online on the gov.uk website, and you're looking up the tables to find out the relevant salary levels, etc., for the job that you're looking at, it's really important to look at the right one. And that will depend on those factors, such as when the person was first sponsored under the skilled worker route, as well as whether any other sort of discounts apply. So it has made it more complicated. Do make sure that you're looking at the right set, especially if it makes the difference between somebody being eligible for sponsorship or not. And I should say that we've talked about salary criteria and the skills threshold so far, but the other criteria that always applied to the skilled worker route still applies before. So the person still does need to satisfy an English language requirement, which they can do in a number of different ways. And there is also that financial or maintenance requirement, which the employer can usually certify. So those parts are unchanged. And in the three boxes on that slide there, so we've got then the people on or after the 22nd of July 2025 who are just going into the skilled worker route for the first time. Those are subject to the most severe restrictions. We've then got the people in that interim period, so on or after the 4th of April 2024, but up to the 21st of July. And then we've got the pre-4th of April people who are in the best position in terms of flexibility. So if you are looking at whether a job is suitable for sponsorship and whether it meets the criteria, first thing to do is to match it up with the job code. It's the employer's job to pick the most suitable job code that's the best match. And then depending on which of those sort of start dates in the skilled worker route are suitable. So when the person was first sponsored in the skilled worker route, you would then consult the tables, and we put them up there for you to take away. Hopefully that helps if you are looking at the salary levels, etc. yourself. And whether or not they'll be able to do a highly skilled or a highly or medium skilled job will depend on whether or when they were first sponsored under the skilled worker route. So it's not that medium skilled jobs are completely off the table, it's just that those are restricted in terms of who can do those. So once you've identified the job code, and I should say there's further exceptions which Erin's going to come on to talk about, you would also look at the immigration salary list or the temporary shortage list if your job is not on the highly skilled job that you're looking at. You would check if they're paid the general threshold, that 41,700. You would check if they're paid the going rate for the job code. And there is also a minimum hourly rate, which is now £17.13 for people sponsored for the first time on or after the 22nd of July. So on the next couple of tables, these purple tables, and again, there's lots of information on here, but we thought it'd be useful for you to have that to sort of take away with you. It shows the sort of range of different salary levels in terms of the general thresholds and different discounts, etc., that are available. So we've got options, and these options track those which UKVI use. So the A, B, C, D, E at the top of the table. And on the next slide, but I won't go to it yet, there's a whole range of additional options available as well. So this first slide, if we look at it first of all, this is for those sponsored for the first time after the 22nd of July 2025, so people subject to the brand new rules, or who were sponsored between the 4th of April and the 21st of July. So in terms of general salary requirements, those are in red at the top of the table. So that standard one of 41,700 is there. I've also put in brackets what it used to be so that you can see the increase. It's roughly about £3,000 increase across the board. But the important point to note is there's a range of different general thresholds depending on the circumstances. So if somebody has a PhD or is a new entrant, so under the age of 26 or switching from graduate or a student visa, there's a range of different general thresholds and in many cases discounted ones. So you would look at the relevant circumstances if the person's able to get a discount and then decide on the general threshold before deciding if they're eligible for sponsorship or not. I've also put onto that table the percentage discounts from the going rate if the person again benefits from being a new entrant, etc. And then the hourly rate of pay at the bottom in red. And if we turn to the next slide, these are additional options which are available. So these are FGH, IJK, and those again are important from UKVI's perspective. Now employers are expected to know which option they're relying on. But these options on this table are for those who benefit from the transitional arrangements because they were first sponsored before the 4th of April 2024. So they get a really beneficial salary discount, roughly £10,000 less on those general thresholds. The exact numbers are on the table, but it's a really big difference in terms of whether people are eligible or not. And we've put up there the general thresholds. There are discounts again if people have got PhD or they're a new entrant, etc. And there's also much lower rates of hourly pay that apply to those people as well. So the main point to take away is not I need to know when they first went into the skilled worker route and then to consult the tables or to take advice. And you will need to be able to explain to UKVI which option you're relying on in terms of salary levels. So if we, just sum up then, sorry, we just go back to that one. We've got these transitional arrangements in place. You do need to know when the person first went into the skilled worker route, when their first certificate of sponsorship was issued or assigned. And then depending on their circumstances, you'll be able to assess the pay. And the higher salary levels, if you are subject to those, they are significantly higher than the current, than the sort of pre-4th of April levels. Right, I'm going to pass on to Erin at this point, who is going to talk about the immigration salary list and temporary shortage list.
Great, thanks, Elaine. So yes, I'm going to do a quick overview of these two lists, which now exist in tandem since the changes in July. So first of all, I'm going to look at the immigration salary list. For those unfamiliar with what this is, it is not new. It used to be formerly known as the shortage occupation list, and it's a list of roles in which there is an acknowledged shortage of UK labour to do those roles. So it does vary from time to time, but the key thing to note that it does contain some medium skilled roles as well as highly skilled roles. So although the headlines are very much that skilled worker is now a highly skilled route, some medium skilled roles do continue to be sponsored through this. The government have indicated that the immigration salary list will be phased out in future changes, and the function will be absorbed by the temporary shortage list, which I'll come on to chat about, and the timing for that is the end of next year. If you look at the immigration salary list now, you'll see that there are dates for each role in which they intend to remove the role from the immigration salary list. Most of them coincide with the intention to to remove this list entirely by the end of 2026, but some of them do have a later date, including into 2028, but that mainly relates to the care sector and relevant job codes for that. When you're sponsoring someone under the immigration salary list, the usual requirements in terms of salary apply. So you must pay the higher of the going rate or the general salary threshold. But it is worth being aware that there is a lower discounted general salary threshold, which Elaine touched on in her slides previously. And there's actually two different levels of what that general salary threshold discount is, depending on whether the person was sponsored under skilled worker pre-4th of April 2024 or after. And on the next slide, we've just got an example that hopefully shows you what you're looking at if you're ever consulting this list. So we've taken job code 1212, which is currently on the immigration salary list. And you can see there's a standard rate, which is the kind of standard going rate, which is discounted. The standard general threshold, which is discounted, and then a lower general threshold, which you can see is further discounted. The standard will apply for pretty much everyone except those sponsored before the 4th of April 2024, where the lower rate will apply. So worth being aware of that and when each one applies. Also worth being aware that the immigration salary list is published on the government website, and all of the salaries are calculated based on 37.5 hours. So if your working pattern is different, it is important to prorate the relevant salary accordingly. Next, I'm going to just talk about the temporary shortage list. So this is new and it was introduced through the July changes. It's an interim measure that's been introduced by the government to allow jobs that are not highly skilled to remain eligible for sponsorship on a temporary basis. So this is a list of mainly medium skilled roles that continue to be sponsorable for now. The government have identified these particular roles as being important for the UK's modern industrial strategy, and the government have called it a bridging mechanism, and its aim was to avoid there being a cliff edge in July when the medium skilled roles came off the list. So for certain industries, they are still able to sponsor certain relevant medium skilled roles if they are on this list. Similarly to the, sorry, if you could just go back, similarly for the as the immigration salary list, the roles on the temporary shortage list are temporary and conditional. There are also dates for removal for these, which are roughly the end of 2026, but the government have indicated it could be earlier in some cases, depending on the circumstances. This list will be reviewed and occupations will only be included on this list in the next turn where the Migration Advisory Committee think it's justified to do so. And they will also be looking at things like whether there's a workforce strategy in place and where employers who use the roles on this list are committed to playing their part in increasing recruitment from the domestic workforce. So the message is definitely that this is a temporary measure. It is not a long-term solution. And if you are using the 6 managers, the standard rate applies where the job is being sponsored after the 4th of April 2024, and the lower rate applies for those who were first sponsored prior to the 4th of April 2024. So again, just being aware of when each applies, and the list is published on the government website, and again, is based on 37.5 hours per week, so make sure you prorate it if you are relying on this list. Just some final thoughts on that. So important to know that those being sponsored under the temporary shortage list cannot bring new family members with them to the UK, and those doing medium skilled roles on the immigration salary list can also not bring new family members to the UK, but highly skilled roles on the ISL can. Because these are both temporary lists, it's unlikely that those being sponsored under either of the lists mentioned will be able to obtain ILR unless they switch into another job code and remain in the UK for the requisite period of time and meet any other requirements for settlements that are in place at the time of application. And it's also worth just being aware that the immigration salary list also comes with a lower visa fee, so it can be worth using and benefiting from that where applicable, so always worth checking these two lists. We're also just going to quickly touch on what the changes mean for adult social care. So if you operate within the adult social care sector, it's important to know that new out-of-country applications are no longer permitted. and we're currently in a transitional period until July 2028. Job codes 6135, which is a care worker job code, and 6136, which is a senior care worker job code, remain on the immigration salary list until July 2028. And in-country applications to switch either into skilled worker and work under those job codes, or to change employer under those job codes, continue to be permitted until that date in 2028. There are some requirements if you are sponsoring in-country applications under these job codes, and you will typically need to have had the person work for you for around 3 months if they're not already in skilled worker before you can go ahead and sponsor them. For those switching into this category, they also cannot bring new family members to the UK, and that was implemented in March 2024, so that's not new but worth being aware of. And I guess the message in all of this is that the government has made it clear that they do intend to stop the sponsorship of care workers in the longer term. So employers in the sector should be thinking to the future, thinking about what they're going to do to fill skills gaps, and looking forward to their recruitment plans in order to do that. Because although there is time, it will probably come around very quickly, as these things always do. And just some final points for me. I'm just going to quickly chat about some of the future changes that the government have indicated are going to be coming over the next 6 to 12 months. So firstly, under the government's white paper, they outlined that the graduate route visa is likely to change. Currently, graduate route visas are in place for a period of 2 years, sometimes a bit longer if you're a PhD graduate, but the government are intending to restrict that period down to 18 months, although PhD graduates will still get a bit longer. That means that if you are employing someone under a graduate route visa, they will have to find a skilled role to continue to be sponsored or to be sponsored in the future, albeit there's going to be a more limited pool of roles eligible, as we've discussed, and they will have a shorter period to find a job because that's going to be restricted down to 18 months. If you do currently employ a lot of people on graduate route visas, it's worth thinking about the roles that they're undertaking, whether they're going to be eligible for sponsorship at the end of their graduate route visas, and maybe taking a look at your graduate roles in general to see if what roles will or will not be eligible going forward. The government have also indicated that they're going to change the rules on settlement or acquiring indefinite leave to remain. The white paper has indicated that they're likely to require 10 years as a skilled worker to obtain indefinite leave to remain in most cases. Currently, the requisite period of time is 5 years. The 5-year route will be retained for certain family visas, including family of a British citizen or settled worker, and that's what we're expecting. But this is all subject to consultation, which is due to take place towards the end of this year. We do expect there will be shorter periods to qualify for ILR for skilled workers who make a significant contribution. What specifically that looks like is not being confirmed yet and will be part of the consultation, but we expect it to be things like people doing highly skilled or critical roles in the UK or who are highly paid. This is all part of the strategy to reduce net migration and to introduce an earned settlement model. The specific date for implementation is unknown, but we do expect it to apply to existing skilled workers who are already in the UK. So this might have quite a big consequence for certain people being sponsored, but the detail is still to be published on that. The impact of that change in particular is likely to mean that there's going to be longer periods of sponsorship in the UK. It might make the UK less attractive on the whole for migrant workers to come if they think they have to get 10 years of service, so to speak, in order to acquire ILR if other countries are not doing the same. The increased period of sponsorship also means that employers may have significantly increased costs. They'll have to pay, for example, 10 years of immigration skills charge, cost fees and visa fees rather than 5. So from a budgeting perspective, that could have an impact. It's also important, I would say, to consider your current workforce, the people that you currently sponsor. If anyone already has 5 years or is close to 5 years, it would be important to encourage them to apply for ILR as soon as possible, just to make sure they aren't prejudiced by any of these changes when they come. Other changes are that the immigration skills charge is due to go up. The government have indicated that they're going to increase it by 32%. The timing for this is likely to be by the end of this year. But this means from a practical perspective that medium and large employers will have an increase in the immigration skills charge to £1,320 per year, which is up from £1,000 per year. That's a budgeting point to factor in. The government have also indicated that they're going to make changes to the English language requirements. That means that there's likely to be a higher standard of English required for those entering the UK as skilled worker. So currently, those applying have to meet a test at level B1. That's likely to increase to level B2 by the end of this year. And partners moving to the UK will also have to have a basic English, basic level of English to apply for a dependent visa, and the government expect that level to have increased. So, for example, the test that you sit at each point of extension or settlement will have to be at a higher level than previously set. And again, that's due by the end of 2025. The government have also indicated that global talent visas and high potential visas will be easier to obtain, but the details on that are still to be published. So I'm conscious of time, so just a few key takeaways before we finish up for the Q&A. Key thing to note is that it has become more difficult to sponsor people under skilled worker, and fewer jobs are more eligible than was the case earlier this summer. The rules are more complex due to having these various transitional arrangements running in tandem. It can be easy to get it wrong, but it can make the difference between retaining an employee or sponsoring an employee in the first place. So it is important to get it right, and if in doubt, to take advice where needed. Remember that if you are sponsoring someone and relying on transitional arrangements, you should ensure the cost contains that relevant information to avoid UKVI just rejecting the cost application. Thinking about budgeting is important. As I mentioned, costs for sponsorship are likely to be higher because you're likely to have to sponsor people for a longer period if the indefinite leave to remain changes are implemented by the government in their current proposed form. If you're sponsoring someone, always check the immigration salary list and temporary shortage list if you can't find a job on the main list of job codes. It could be the difference between sponsoring someone or not. And as we mentioned, jobs at a lower skill threshold do appear on both of those lists. And also think to the future and thinking about how these changes to the graduate route visas and skilled worker salary rates will impact your organisation in the longer term. It's worth taking stock of the roles that you commonly sponsor and checking if they will remain eligible following these changes. So I think we've still got a few minutes to do some Q&A.
Yeah, I've got the first question through. I see a few people have been asking if they will get slides. Yes, we will be sending out a recording of the session and that will have the slides attached to them. So yes, you'll be able to catch up later. So first question that's in is asking about the global business mobility route, which we haven't actually focused on today because we've been talking just about the skilled worker sponsorship route, asking if the salary requirements for that have also changed. So Erin, do you want to take that first one?
Yep, so the global business mobility minimum salary also increased in July, so it now sits at £52,500 per year, or the going rate for the job in question. It is important to note that the global business mobility was, or at least senior and specialist worker, was always a highly skilled route. So there's not been a significant change in terms of skills threshold, but the salary threshold has increased.
Okay, and I've got another question here from an employer asking, can I increase the salary for a particular employee if they're below the threshold so that they meet the requirements? I'd say you've got to be careful about this because there is, I guess the immigration rules have a test called the genuine vacancy test, and that's about the employer having a genuine job that genuinely meets the requirements for sponsorship in terms of both skill level and salary level. And that does include prohibitions against, say, exaggerating the skills level of a job or the salary level, etc., just to get somebody a visa. So there are restrictions and there could be a compliance breach if you just do that deliberately just to get the person a visa. But you would want to have a think about, are there like genuine justifications for the salary that you're paying? And more generally, I would say some clients are looking at the new rules to see where their pay sits in relation to sponsorship, especially if they've had, for example, graduate programs where they then have people graduating and they want to keep them on. Like, where does your pay sit more generally? And I think that's a bit different than just bumping up somebody's pay in one particular instance to sort of suit. Another question, which was about, I think we've maybe covered, but anyway, can those sponsored under the immigration salary list and the temporary shortage list bring dependents with them, but it might be worth just recapping on that.
Yep, so those who are sponsored under the immigration salary list or temporary shortage list in medium skilled roles can't bring new family members with them to the UK. That means the majority of the roles on those lists cannot bring dependents. Those who've already got dependents in the UK should be able to keep them with them.
Okay, great. And we're just over time there, so we'll finish up there. So if you've got questions afterwards, please do contact us and we'll come back to you on those. And thanks everybody for joining.